Welcome to this homeless training. I'm Carl Hetler with the City of South Bend, coordinator of homeless outreach, and we're grateful to have Maureen Bauer, our Indiana State Representative for House District 6, joining us this morning. Maureen, tell us about your background and how long you've been serving Hoosiers.
Hi, good morning, Carl. I am a South Bend resident. I was born here and I attended Adams High School. I currently live in the Sunnymead area, the same home I grew up in. I have been a state representative for 5 years now, since the 2020 election. And one of the reasons why I wanted to run for this office was to help my neighbors and to help the individuals of the generation that raised me, those who still live in these neighborhoods since I was a kid in these same homes. Their kids may have left now, moved away, but are seeing sort of the gaps in care and help serve individuals a bit better. So in regards to my role and responsibility in the legislature, I serve on a number of different committees, including public health, courts and code, environmental affairs, and judicial.
That's great. And today we're talking about understanding the legislative process and some of the important legislation that's happening and that's recently been passed here in the state of Indiana. How can agencies speak up? We've got lots of different agencies who are on the call and who will watch this video later. How can agencies speak up and be active in the legislative process?
Sure. So a lot of agencies, some might have a larger lobbying organization that advocates themselves or the people they serve, or in particular, if they rely on state funding, they have someone who shows up and testifies, and that's incredibly important to speak up on behalf of the people that you're serving. We have more tools than ever at our fingertips to contact your elected officials, to reach out to them. I would say there's a bit more pressure now to make that connection with your elected official and keep that going and year round, not just when your funding's on the chopping block or when we're in session and they're considering policy that's going to impact your agency or what you do. So storytelling is incredibly important. Providing data to legislators is incredibly important. The ability to create a one-pager really speaks volumes to be precise and effective. But also just speaking up, because we've seen a trend of a lot of individuals not testifying. I can't tell you the number of times we've had a bill in committee and no one signed up to testify. The fact that that's going to impact policy and policy change and a lot of people is a little disheartening.
In the Ryan Dowd National Training, he emphasized that it's important to stick to 1 to 2 issues when you're meeting with your representative, whether it's at the state or federal level. And so that's really helpful to hear that, and the importance of sharing stories also to talk about how the personal impact for you or for your agency or the people you serve is impacted by legislation. What kind of staffing support does each representative have in the State House? Because it's a big job that you're carrying.
Yeah, I think one of the misconceptions is people think we have local staff like Congress and Indianapolis staff. I don't have a local office, so a lot of my meetings are done in coffee shops and over lunch. But I have one legislative assistant who's actually a St. Mary's College graduate, and she lives in Indianapolis and she works full time. So if you call the office, you're likely to speak with Grace. She does a lot of constituent service work, helps connect individuals to services like BMV issues or employment issues, or with FSSA, looking for help with utilities. Of course, I'm accessible as well. I respond to emails. I have multiple different emails, whether it's through my legislative campaign or my my political campaign or my legislative office. So people reach out to me both ways, and I monitor those and get them connected to the services they need. And then that legislative assistant has 2 other representatives as well. So she's doing that same work, state representatives in different parts of the state. So from South Bend to West Lafayette to Gary. So those are her 3 representatives districts. And then I have one secretary, and I believe she has 5 representatives. So they stay pretty busy year round, our small team of 2. And then during the legislative session, we have session interns, which not only is a great help, but it's a great opportunity for students to learn. And we do intern fairs in South Bend and across the state to get college graduates engaged in their state government. And so it's a really great opportunity to have a foot in the door if you're interested in government. And I try to promote every year, and that deadline to apply is usually October 31st, House or Senate.
That's good to know, the different opportunities that are available and to hear about the support you have. You mentioned emails. How many calls and emails do you get on average a week that you're having to deal with?
We get a lot more during session, that's for sure. We have extra people that run the phones during that time. So there's like a call center, and B is the person who's usually on the other line. She's retiring this year after decades of service to the state of Indiana. So Grace logs all of those. We have a constituent tracker where we can see your name and information and the issue that in about. I will note that we do specify if you live in district or out of district. Sometimes that matters to legislators, sometimes it doesn't not. Of course, am bound to represent the people in my district, so I always take the message that I receive from residents a little higher regard than those outside. But you see a lot of organizations who do great mobilizing, and I think that is effective when you get 100 emails, or poor B gets 100 phone calls she has to field. But the message is a lot of people are calling asking you to vote a certain way on this issue. So that message is received when it's bulk. But of course, when I get a letter or a personal email from someone in the district, I usually am responding personally.
That's great. Besides constituent voices, what other considerations do you have to consider with legislation? What else do you consider besides constituent voices that you're hearing from?
Well, just going back to the testimony in committee, we live 2.5 hours away up here in South Bend from the State House, so it's not always easy for someone to testify in person. We don't allow for Zoom testimony. You've got to show up. You often have to sit in the room for hours before your name is called. So often it provides a little more strength for organizations that are in Indianapolis to speak up. That's often why many organizations collaborate with an Indianapolis lobbyist. We know that some partners here locally use ARC Indiana, who helps advocate for people with disabilities. Others have lawyers that they use just to track legislation that are affecting their industry or agency. So if you have the ability to mobilize a team to come down and testify, that's always best to speak at the microphone in front of a smaller group of legislators. But yeah, besides the storytelling, the data, but also hearing from you and how a policy will impact your profession is important as well, because the people who are going to show up are those agencies who might be working against your agency, who push bad policy, who are ready on the spot. I would say some of the most impressive organizations, one example would be the Indiana Teachers Association. They meet with legislators, not just that agree with them, which I often find I'm sitting down with people that they already have my support. I already am voting with them. And I say, I'm happy to be your cheerleader and say, go for it and this is what you have to do, but you need to spend your time in a room with someone who's voting against you, advocate why we need to edit this policy before it moves forward, and give them specifics to where the harm would be done if a bill passes in a certain way. But they will show up in droves to fight for our children, for public education, for their profession. And now I argue they shouldn't have to, that we shouldn't have to make teachers come down and be lobbyists and try to track down their legislator, but they will, and they show up. And I'm so for those individuals who recognize that they have to be in front of policymakers sometimes.
You mentioned how advocacy groups have to try to build consensus and adjust their perspectives. What are some other ways that you're building consensus with your colleagues across the aisle?
Yeah, I think the number one thing, and it's more important now, is respect. We have to be able to have conversations with one another, not just yell at one another or just talk within our groups that, again, you have the same think the same as you, or vote the same as you, or look the same as you. I have helped restart our group of legislators that are 45 years of age and under, just to get in the same room together and get to know one another, find out, oh, you have children and where is your district in this state, and really creating the fact that we are human. We are all in public service. We all believe we are doing good and impacting positive change. And so finding those shared values instead of that partisan framing that often divides us, even when we get kind of in our own silos. I know I've heard a lot of organizations talk about getting out of their silos, and we have to do that too as policymakers. And it might be uncomfortable, but as I've been told, being uncomfortable is when you grow. And so same for those who maybe are intimidated to speak to their lawmakers. I mean, they're your neighbor, they're your community member. You probably bump into them at the grocery store or a restaurant. That's what they're there for, to be your voice. So you got to use your voice.
Yeah. And that's another point that Ryan Dowd made in his national training, is that when we find issues that are bipartisan, that it's harder to dismiss that. When we can work across the aisle and find issues that everyone can agree on is really helpful. Are there other things that the general public doesn't understand about the legislative process, misconceptions or myths that you have to correct when you meet with constituents?
Besides not having, the local staff, I think also we are a part-time legislature. So we are only down in session either January through March or January through April. And then we're back home in the district. That's when you can reach out and invite your legislator to a site visit, to do a tour of your facility, to meet people that your organization is serving, to just request a coffee meeting or to come into your office and sit down and show them, some of your data and numbers that you've gone through in the past year, to advocate now in the next 2 years coming down. And so really building that relationship in the interim when there are legislators back home is key. So you don't want to hear from a politician only at election time. I would argue that we should hear from constituents during the interim, in addition to during session when bills are moving and decisions are being made.
That's really helpful to know about. Yeah, it's about a relationship too between constituents and their representatives also. Let's turn to some specific bills that were addressed or passed this past session. How did you address Senate Bill 197? It was the first effort to criminalize homelessness that the legislature considered and then brought up a couple other times.
Yeah, so I imagine a lot of you on this call track that language. It did one chamber and died in the second. So halfway through the Indiana General Assembly, House bills go over to the Senate, Senate bills go over to the House. And that's when we mess it all up or we add amendments and change things. So homelessness, criminalization of homelessness language did not move out of the Senate. So a House member put that language into a Senate bill. It narrowly passed. All 30 Democrat members voted against it, and maybe a dozen or so Republicans voted against it. It did pass with that criminalization of homelessness language in it. You asked how I advocate. I spoke on the House floor against it. I spoke with some of my colleagues about our efforts to address homelessness in my community. We often see a lot of attack lists in the Indiana General Assembly because it's a big city. It's our biggest city in Indianapolis, and a lot of people aren't familiar with big cities and the problems in big cities. And so they think they can solve it with a piece of legislation. And let's be clear that homelessness is an issue that needs to be addressed. But I gave an interview recently to local media. There was a lot of attention on this issue, and I stated, and it isn't hyperbole, I believe we need to get to know the reason why individuals are homeless. It's not just that there aren't enough homes or you can't afford homes. Maybe they're struggling with substance abuse. Maybe they're fleeing a domestic violence situation. Maybe they don't feel safe at home. Maybe they were kicked out of home. There's so many issues that will determine how we solve this problem. And putting handcuffs on someone and finding them is not it. If it were, we would have done that a long time ago. So getting back to the legislative process, that language was added into at the last 2 weeks of session. Bills go back to their original House or Senate chamber, and that author can either concur, agree to the changes made by the opposite chamber, or dissent. And that senator dissented with the changes that the House made and said, this language will not be in my bill, and it had to find a new home. So for the last 2 weeks of session, we were tracking, getting rumors where that language was going to lie. They tried to put it in a couple different bills, but people kept pushing back, and it was defeated in the end. So it didn't move this year. There was a lot of work to get it in another bill. So I think they're going to strategize over this time and come up with another solution, and maybe it'll look a little different. If this is an issue that's important to you, connect with those legislators now and provide some actual productive solutions to addressing this issue.
Yeah, it's helpful to know how the process works and what to be looking for in the future. And to your point about getting to know people, we have a lot of great teams here locally in South Bend, from Oaklawn and Our Lady of the Road, Health Plus, Imani Unidad, that are all going out to work with people, as well as many other volunteer groups that are trying to get to know people and know their individual circumstances and get people the help they need, because we have a lot of great resources that we're directing people to, whether it's Center for the Homeless or Motels for Now or the YWCA or Avenues Rehab. And so we're really trying to do that and practice what you're saying is true, that you see guiding the legislative process also. A big part of
It's great.
that housing process is also a housing first, which goes back to the George W. Bush presidency when it was established as a federal policy. What are some of the changes that we're seeing at the state level that could impact some of our local programs that use housing first, such as Motels for Now or our permanent supportive housing sites?
Yeah, one of the things I think that kind of snuck through the budget, or that people may not be aware of, was the funding for Housing First initiatives was zeroed out. It was a previous $1 million appropriation, and that was removed this session. The push for this criminalization of homelessness language was by the Cicero Institute of Texas. They testified in the House and Senate in favor of this bill. And if you read up on this organization or just visit their website, they are critical of Housing First and don't believe that it works, and cite various resources to prove their point. And so they want to shift money from housing to addiction and mental health treatment. And they, while they weren't effective in their priority bill of criminalizing homelessness, they did influence those budget leaders and remove that funding for the next 2-year budget. So in regards to motels for now, I think everything will be okay with the plans to expand, and maybe you all might even know more than me, but and to build, but that's something we have to advocate for in the future. Otherwise, as it goes with many other issues, and you had to mention individuals from the library here, but we're going to rely on our philanthropy organizations those gaps. We previously were depending on state funds to help our communities and our people. So that will be something to watch and advocate for, and to talk to your legislators for, and also, making sure they know they voted against that.
Yeah, and we are moving forward with the New Day Intake Center to replace motels for now is going to redevelopment commission this next month to hopefully get that land transferred and line up all their funding. I think they're at 93% funding is what I last heard from them. And we've just are in the process of opening new permanent supportive housing units over by the new Youth Service Bureau complex. So the first residents have started moving in to those new units, and we have more scheduled with South Bend Heritage. And so it is important to still find other funding sources because we have the statistics to show that it works to get people housed first and then get them the mental health and substance use services that they need. In addition to, some people wanted to first do treatment first, and having those resources at places like Hope Ministries or Life Treatment Center are important to have those options for people who want that more controlled oversight in their environment also. Well, one of the bills that you were able to help successfully pass was Bill 1416. What were some of the challenges that you faced with that, and how does that bill specifically help vulnerable people?
I was a co-author on this bill, and it was authored by Representative John Bartlett out of Indianapolis. He has really championed and worked on legislation to address human trafficking, and he was successful in passing his piece of legislation that will now require human trafficking awareness posters to be added into gas stations, rest areas, and welcome centers that have indoor access. This may not seem like a huge accomplishment, but it is for the state of Indiana, because we've had the Restaurant Association or even convenience stores have lobbyists. As I mentioned, there are a lot of folks that have people advocating for and against legislation, and they don't like extra responsibilities in the general sense. And so we narrowed it down to just facilities where people are going in. And that makes sense. People have to see the posters to use that resource. And so you can call the hotline or text help or info to 233-733. And I've gotten to know an organization whose board is all victims of human trafficking or sexual assault or sexual abuse. They are a remarkable group that has influenced policy change and helped get this bill passed, showed up to testify, had meetings with us and other legislators during the interim. They help address suicide prevention by coming and having a booth at the suicide prevention walks. And that's a perfect example of just I guess people call it grassroots organization who's passionate about, and their focus is policy change. They help get this across the line by sharing their experience and what's happening in Indiana. And it's hard to say to a piece of legislation like this that could help so many. And oftentimes those individuals who are being abused will have a photographic memory, and they will remember that number. And when they have the opportunity to call, they will. So a lot of organizations put those numbers in voluntarily, but now we're line that and make sure that more people will see this.
That's great. And for those of you with a Ryan Dowd license, he's done a whole training on human trafficking and about some of the resources, things to do and not do. Our local YWCA is not only an advocate, but a housing resource for anyone, male or female, is a victim of domestic violence. And one of the big things that Ryan Dowd talks about is as opposed to trying to quote, rescue people it's important to do more what your legislation accomplished, make people aware of the resources that are out there so that when they want to leave an unsafe situation, they have the resources, know the phone number, who to call, that there's agencies out there when they're ready to leave to empower them. So that's great that you've been able to accomplish that. One of the other barriers that we see to housing is past evictions, and that can include for people who have paid off their past bills or even have something from a long time ago. How does SB Bill 142 address some of the eviction challenges that Hoosiers face today?
Hi.
So we lost you there for a minute. So yeah, talk about Senate Bill 142 and how it addresses evictions.
Okay. So this legislation was actually work that was done by Notre Dame Eviction Institute, a law clinic, and they came down to the State House and testified before the Judiciary. And this bill passed out of the House Judiciary Committee unanimously, and now is law to help expand the state's eviction sealing program. Courts can seal evictions without a hearing in some instances. And as you mentioned, this is going to help address some of those barriers to housing that people face. So going forward, and we'll keep some records confidential. And so this, you'll see new eviction sealing events popping up, and we can help more people eliminate that past history that is an actual barrier to getting housing in the state.
Yeah, we'll be having a eviction sealing clinic with Portage Township coming up next month, and we'll be advertising that to help people be aware of that. And so we hope that that helps a lot of people with housing. So that's great legislation to know that that's been done. Finally, last issue, talking about substance use. We've seen an increase in both fentanyl and xylazine in the drug supply in our community. What's being done on the legislative side to address increase awareness and reduce harm for people with these issues?
There was a piece of legislation introduced a number of times in a row to decriminalize test strips. Some community organizations use these test strips, but it is actually classified as drug paraphernalia. So you could have the potential of doing more harm. I'm not sure how often that's enforced. But with the passage of House Bill 1167, it is now legal to possess and use these test strips and other field test kits that detect substances like fentanyl, xylazine, and other deadly substances. So previously, they were classified as drug paraphernalia. So even if the intent was to help others, that was a risk involved. Police officers use these regularly, and so now we're all kind of playing on the same field here, and like allowing people to safely protect themselves. And the idea is to save lives. And so hopefully this will be a major harm reduction tool.
Yep. In addition to Amani Unidad and Health Plus, Naxos Neighbors are passing out test strips for both of those substances to help increase awareness. And Naxos is also working with Notre Dame to test for other chemicals. And what's been really helpful there is they're able to then push out alerts when there is a bad batch to alert people and to try to increase awareness and reduce the harm. Again, our goal is that we're trying to keep people alive and to the point where they'll make a decision that they want to reduce their usage, that they want to go into treatment or enter detox. And so we don't want to see lives lost. We don't want to see people harmed. We want to reduce the calls on emergency services of responding to overdoses. And so by having these resources available, we're able to help care for people when they're in this difficult time of addiction and challenges that they're facing and have the resources. As we wrap up, Maureen, any other issues that you're really passionate about that you want to mention?
We did pass legislation to address the Near North Revitalization Organization over near Notre Dame. They have the only community land trust in the state, and we were made aware of an issue gosh, I think it's been 3 years now that we've been trying to address this, that that organization owns the land, but the home is sold to a family at an affordable rate, but the home is being taxed outside of that, what is considered. And so we wanted a tool to allow the assessment of that property to remain affordable, so people weren't being taxed out of that price range of affordable home. And after a few years, we finally got that language passed. And so the idea keep homes affordable in the NNRO area. And that was done through collaboration with my Senate colleagues and those who are on the budget writing team, and meeting new senators that I've never met before, and really building relationship, and hopefully that will continue in the future, and we'll see the benefit here in St. Joseph County. But beyond that, I've always remained focused on maternal and infant health. We just got preliminary data on our infant health, and we've made some strides in that area. We're still above the national average of where we would like to be in regards to infant health. But the budget that was put out cuts a lot of those resources that have allowed us to make these strides. And so I have some real concerns about what the actual impact is going to be on families and children and women, and through their pregnancies. So we've seen some cuts to our health department funding. We've seen Mishawaka having to close a location, which will then put more strain on South Bend clinics and their department. And what we need to hear from the community is those real life impacts and how it's in fact to serve the community. And so I encourage you to stay engaged, stay involved, and keep that lines of communication open. I can't tell you how many times I've heard from legislators, well, they never called me. And I said, well, they called me. And so now I'm lobbying that legislator on that organization's behalf. You can take away that argument. You never contacted me. You never, just by sending them a message or asking to meet, or by reaching out to their legislative assistant with the message if you can't get to them directly. So
That's great encouragement. And this has been a great opportunity for us to learn about the process and ways we can get involved in important things that are happening in our state house. So I want to again thank Maureen Bauer, our Indiana State Representative for House District 6, for joining us for this conversation.